says starting. Hangout on air is live. It also says we have 0 viewers. So.
Really? Wow. Well, I got an email from Jackie with the link.
Air is live. All right, can you hear that playing in the background? It also says we have 0 viewers. So.
Really? All the stuff we just said just repeated itself.
Yes. Can you hear that playing in the background? Okay, because I have it. All right, we're going to have to figure this out. Okay. Over here.
All the stuff we just said just repeated itself.
Yes, because Chase tells me I have to have. Okay. Because I have it. See? Okay. I'm just turning that off. I'll figure that out in a minute. Because Chase tells me I also have to have it open to pay attention to what everybody else is seeing and to see the chat roll.
Right.
So once I get you talking, I have to mute this so I can listen to that.
Okay.
Anyway, hi everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar. It looks like we have a dozen viewers now. That's nice. I am happy to introduce you to Wayne Snell. He is not new to note investing, but he's fairly new to being a full-time dedicated note investor, as he just recently quit his job as VP of marketing in a financial software company. So imagine the stress of going from an 80-hour work week plus a notes business to just being able to focus on your notes. A huge transition for him, and he is killing it. So tonight he's going to be kindly doing an introduction to notes presentation for us. I think obviously the newbies will get a lot out of that, but I think even those who have been doing notes for a while will get quite a few great tidbits. And without further ado, here is Mr. Snell.
Thanks, Kimberly.
No problem.
Hi, everybody. So nice introduction. Thanks. And what I'm going to do today is go through a presentation that I put together for specifically for this event because we have a mixed audience. I looked at the people who were registered, and there's a mixture of people who are investing in notes already, and some have been doing it for quite a while. And then obviously there's also some that are brand new to the event, to what note investing is. So I want to kind of give information that everybody can benefit from. And without further ado, let me share my screen real quick. And so you can lose my mug, and then you'll see my presentation once I figure out why we're in infinity mode here. Okay. So Kimberly, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So the plan today is to talk for about 40 minutes or so. Those of you who know me know that I am pretty verbose. I love to talk about notes. I'll do my best to provide you with a lot of content. And at the end, or actually, I forgot, there's a chat roll thing that you can put in questions if you have any. Kimberly will kind of monitor those, and if it makes sense to stop and interrupt, we'll answer them right there. But if not, I also left a little time at the end so we can talk. Well, I say talk, but you can type in some questions and then we can try and answer it. So let's get started, and let me start out with a little bit of an agenda on what I intend to cover. So a little bit about me, because some of you may not know who I am. Kimberly gave a great intro. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on that, other than to say what the impetus for getting involved in notes was. I'll talk a lot about what notes are. And it's really interesting because there's been so many discussions lately on notes, but a lot of people I talk to really don't know what they are. So this will just give you a framework for what we're going to talk about the rest of the meeting. And then highlighting, if you're going to invest in notes, what your strategy should be. And I've got a slide that we can talk about, give you some tidbits that I've done along the way that I've learned from others as well, like Kimberly and others. What's important for investing? So how do you successfully make the transition to either a part-time or full-time note investor? And we'll do that through a number of case studies that I've put together. My business, we have quite a few notes, and so I like to highlight a couple of the exit strategies that are the most common ones so that you can get an idea of whether this makes sense for you or not. And then we'll end it up with a summary and a questions and answer. So just quickly talk about me. I am the president of a company named Platinum Ventures based in Dallas. So we've been in business for 6 years. I've been a real estate investor for over 10 years. I started out as a investor in some real estate investment trusts, went and decided that wasn't really my thing. I really wanted to get involved in a little more hands-on. I did have a full-time job, so I got into the buy and hold single-family rental. That was 10 years ago, and actually 9 years ago. And about 5 years ago, I realized that there had to be a better way to get rentals faster, and that was the impetus for why I started looking into notes. Currently, my company has purchased over 100 notes just this year. That was our actual stretch goal when we were at a mastermind a year ago, December. My business partner and I were kind of looking at each other going, wow, you know, it'd be really cool if we could get to 100. And I don't know that either of us thought we could at the time, but we did. And we hit that number 2 weeks ago. So I'm pretty proud of that. And our primary method of working on notes is in no specific order. There's a lot of foreclosures, unfortunately, in the notes business, but our goal is to reperform a note whenever possible, get somebody to give us a deed in lieu if they can't reperform. And sometimes when we purchase a pool of notes, there's notes that don't fit our criteria that we'll flip to other investors. Currently, the business is in 12 states, so our top ones are listed up there. You know, I don't have to read it, but we do focus mostly for us on occupied properties. So we really like to try and help people, and I'll talk a little bit more about our why later. And then, as Kimberly mentioned, I was in the IT space. I actually started out as a programmer years and years and years ago, but the last 15 years or so, I was a vice president of marketing for a global software company based here in Dallas. Had dozens of people working for me around the world. I had to fly around a lot. And the reason that's relevant isn't because I like to brag about it, but it kind of gives you an idea of what it might take when you see my slides in a bit, what it takes to actually perform a note business when you have a full-time job. And a lot of you do. And I talk to a lot of people who have full-time jobs, and they kind of wonder how do you do it? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So what is a note? Well, there's a legal definition, right? So it's a legal instrument. It's a document that defines terms and conditions for debt. And notes can be for houses, they can be for buying a car, an apartment, whatever. And it creates a lien against the property. And traditionally, there's something called first position liens. So when you buy your house, for example, you usually get a first position lien, but if you don't want to pay PMI, sometimes the lenders will say, hey, you can get a second mortgage to cover the extra piece, and then you have like a small junior lien, which is called a second as well. So lenders usually, those are the kind of notes that we like to buy in the note industry. Just be aware that while we talk on this particular webinar about real estate notes, a note could be anything. In fact, there's quite a few people I know in the business who also buy commercial properties through notes and are buying debt like somebody who's defaulted on their car loan. They can buy that too. I don't. That's not what this topic's about, but I just want to make sure that you know it is available. And there's really 3 types of real estate notes out there. Performing notes are what you would imagine. If you have a house and you're paying your mortgage every month, you're a performing loan. You're a performing note. You are paying on time, and the lender is receiving those payments. So there are a lot of people in the note industry who invest in performing notes. A good way to do that is with your IRA, for example. If you're looking for an annuity or a cash flow, think of it as a rental without the tenant. You're getting monthly income. The second type of note is non-performing, and that is really what I'll be spending the most time talking about tonight, because that's what I do in my business. But non-performing notes are notes that typically have been delinquent over, well, officially the terminology is over 3 months, but when somebody doesn't pay their mortgage for whatever reason, they get into what they call a default situation, and at some point the lender decides this is no longer considered a performing or sub-performing loan. Now they treat it as a non-performing. When a lender gets enough of these on their portfolio, they're actually limited in how much they can lend against their portfolio. So there's some government regulations out there that say if the lender like Chase or Citibank or somebody like that has over X% of defaulted loans on their portfolio, then they need to sell them off. And that allows them to then essentially wipe the slate clean, and they can continue to lend. So there is some government rules around that. There's also some things where it's really expensive for non-performing notes for big entities like a Chase or a Citi or Bank of America. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then the final piece is reperforming notes. A reperforming note is what it sounds like. It used to be delinquent, and for some reason it's now being repaid again. There's a number of ways that can happen, and we'll talk a lot about that in a few slides. So that is what a note is. They usually are typically tied to a mortgage. They usually have some other documents associated with them that you will hear from time to time. One is called assignments, and another is called allonges. And an assignment is when one lender sells their loan, or their interest in the loan, I should say, to somebody like me. They would assign their rights to us, and then the assignments assigns the mortgage. I'm sorry, the note, and an allonge assigns the mortgage. And so they're kind of a hand-holding process. So if you will, sometimes you see a note could be sold 5, 6, 10 times since it was incepted. And when we buy those things, we got to make sure that the entire chain of those assignments and allonges is available and recorded. And we'll talk why that's important in just a moment. So I mentioned I like non-performing notes, but I guess the real question is why? Because if you think about it, performing notes are an annuity. You're getting cash in every month. They're mailbox money, essentially. So what is it about a performing note that I like and many other investors will focus on? For me, it's that I'm able to access a substantial chunk of real estate for less than the going rate. In other words, we can pay less money for a note that is securing access to real estate than I would if I went to try and buy it myself. For example, let's assume somebody has a defaulted mortgage of $100,000 out there. Typically, we can buy that for 30 to 40% off of that price. So if you will, somewhere between $50,000 to $75,000, depending upon all sorts of factors. And so you have like an immediate equity. Now, you're not really buying the property yet, but bear with me a minute, you'll see what I mean, why that's important. You're really buying a investment that has very little risk because it is tied to physical assets. There's a piece of property with a house on it. Now, the house might be a disaster, but we don't buy those. We try and buy non-performing notes that are in pretty good shape. So there is a little bit of a reason for, if I have to take the property back, I want it. I'm not going to buy something if I don't think I can take it back and do something nice with it, like either resell it or rent it or even potentially gift it to somebody, a charitable organization. But what I really like about non-performing notes for me when I first started was I could do it. It wasn't rocket science. It's work, and a lot of work, but it's pretty straightforward. You can build a team of people to help you, and with the right education, anyone on this call can do it. You don't have to worry about. It's not like tax deed investing where you have to worry about certain strategies and things like that. Not that there's anything wrong with tax deeds. And there's a lot of ways you can make money. In fact, there's somewhere around 9 or 10 different exit strategies that we've employed in our business. I'm sure there's more that I don't even know about. But what I like is it makes me better returns on my money than any other really potential investment that aren't one-offs. I can consistently see above average returns for my money. We also have joint venture partners that participate with us, and they see above average returns, especially if you're used to seeing 2, 3, maybe 5% on your money if you're lucky. In your 401k or your IRAs or God forbid the savings accounts. These generally generate higher returns and consistently higher returns with the safety that I talked about before. In fact, a lot of people use their self-directed IRAs. I know that we've had a previous meetup talking about a self-directed IRA, but for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it is just like any other individual retirement account, except you direct where you're spending or where you're investing your money versus like an IRA with Schwab, for example, where they're going to be investing in that in mutual funds. In fact, self-directed IRAs usually almost always don't let you invest in any sort of stock market type things. They want you to invest in real estate mostly. You can do, pretty much anything except, I think, antiques. I mean, you can buy gold, you can anything you want. And what it allows you to do then is just direct it into something that you're personally invested in, versus potentially, not knowing what you're really buying with a mutual fund. And for me, there's a big why on why I like non-performing notes. I actually like the opportunity to help people while I'm making money. So for me, the win-win for the borrowers is really one of the most important reasons I like non-performing notes. And I think a lot of people feel that way as well. It is, you can help people. Sometimes, really bad things have happened to really good people, and whether it be a death in the family or a job loss or all the above, and, they get off track. It's not really intentional, although I will say that there are people who take advantage of the system, and we don't try to help them. But for the families that have just gotten behind on their payments, or something bad happened and now they want to work with us, we will work with them to try and keep them and save their home, and we make money while we're doing it. So for me, that's a nice why. I like to help people. I have an affinity for elderly and veterans. And we try and go out of our way to find notes. It's not always as simple as it sounds, but if we can figure out that there is a vet or an elderly person in a house, we're going to do our best to help them, even if it means we're going to make a little less money doing it, just because it feels good and we're still making enough. So that's why I like non-performing notes. And I know there's a lot of other whys. You may have your own whys. I would actually, if you don't have a why, I would suggest maybe think about it a little bit, because that would help propel what you might want to do if you're in the notes business. So what does a non-performing junk look like? I mean, as you can see on the screen, the mental image is, wow, we're buying these POSs and they are just total garbage. And while there are a lot of those out there, that is not, at least for my business model, what we buy. As you can see, these are 4 properties that we actually, or 4 notes, I should say, that we actually picked up over the last couple of years. And none of them are terrible. I mean, they're necessarily older, some of them. One's a condo, one's a really new house out in Florida. But in general, that's the kind of stuff that you're buying a note against. And so when you own a real estate note, non-performing, you want to try and get an asset that has value, and you're paying less for the note than the value of the home, and you want to see some pride of ownership. Now, it's hard to see that in a condo, but you can see the three single-family houses on the screen. They're pretty well kept. That's not always the case. I mean, you never know what it looks like inside, and that is one of the roulette games, if you will, in the note investing world. But overall, as long as you do your due diligence and you find that the value of the property can sustain a good a level, if you had to foreclose and take the property back, for the most part, you're going to do well. Which brings me to, how do you decide what your primary strategy is if you're investing in a note? Now, I'm going to give you my strategies, but I do think you should consider the following up here on the screen in general. A lot of folks, if you're a really busy person, and I was, so I'm kind of giving you advice that I didn't follow myself. You might want to just buy some performing notes, because quite frankly, if you're happy with cash flow and you're okay with making somewhere between 7 to 10 to 12%, you're gonna, you do well with performing notes, especially if it's in your IRA and you're just trying to, grow a little bit of money, or more importantly, if you're nearing retirement age and you want some cash flow to help augment or cover your expenses. Performing notes are a great way to do that. Non-performing notes, however, are really more for, well, I got involved with them because I liked the idea of capital appreciation. And what I mean is, you put $1 in, you get $2 out, and growing your wealth. It doesn't mean you don't get cash flow, because you can, but that was my original strategy. And what I will suggest for each of you on the call today is, think about what is your primary goal. Because if you want to grow your wealth for later, non-performing notes might be a better approach. Or if you're looking for cash flow, then you might want to just consider performing, or a blend of both. That there's no rhyme or reason that says you can't do one or the other. You can do both. The other thing that you might want to look at is whether you're investing in first position liens or seconds. So I personally invest only in first. Kimberly does seconds and first, and there's quite a few people I saw signed up who also do seconds. The thing about seconds is you can get into them for significantly less money. Where you have to be careful with seconds is a first position lien, like my mortgage, if you will. If I have to foreclose, I could wipe out your second lien. Now, the reason that's important is because you could potentially lose money. If you do your due diligence right, you don't lose money. But the goal with seconds is to find a performing first, and then buy your second to try and work out a solution with the borrower who has some sweat equity and some desire to keep their home. And then that could be extremely profitable for less investment. And so seconds are a very great strategy for those people that like to do that. I personally focus my business on firsts, just because I am a little more risk averse. I don't want to worry about anybody trying to foreclose on me. I want to be the driver and the control if I had to foreclose. Now, I will say, that brings me to a comment that's really not on the slide, is, what is your strategy? Are you looking to take property? Oh, it is. Sorry, vacant versus owner occupied. If you're trying to get property, specifically rentals, or you want to buy a vacant property to fix it up and sell it, fix and flip type thing, notes are a great way to do that, but I would suggest you use first to do that. There's a lot of people who are looking for ways to get ahead of the wholesalers, so they have a leg up on getting access to property in certain cities. And quite frankly, my business, we have rentals in the Memphis, Tennessee area, and in the Columbus and Dayton, Ohio areas. And then obviously we have some here in Texas where I'm based. But that's not always my primary goal. I am, as I mentioned, always trying to find an owner-occupied property. And the reason for that is, if somebody's in the house, you can assume a few things. The first is that if somebody's living in the house, pretty much stuff's working. So, they're not going to let the pipes freeze because they're living there. I say that, and then it's a possibility they could let the pipes freeze. But for the most part, people will try and keep the house in functional order since they're living in there. The other thing is it allows you to have multiple exit strategies that are not necessarily available to you with a vacant property. For example, we can work with a borrower who's willing to talk with us and modify their loan payment. So since we've bought it at a discount from their unpaid balance, and they don't know this, right? They have no idea of what we've paid for it. We can forgive certain pieces of that debt for concessions with them. For example, I could take their payment down from $1,000 a month to $650, and as long as the numbers work for me and I'm making the returns I want, it's helping them. You've just given them an incentive to start paying you again, and especially if they now have, if they're underemployed, but they have ways to make their payment when they couldn't make them before. So that's one of the reasons why I like owner occupied. And the other is, of course, stuff's not broken usually, or it's less broken is a better way to say that. The other thing you want to look at is the legal focus of the states you're investing in. Is it something called a judicial state or a non-judicial? It really comes down to this. If you are investing in a judicial state and you had to do any sort of eviction, it's a foreclosure, right? You got to get them out of the house. You're going to have to go through the court to judicially remove them from the property, and that is a lengthy process. In some states, it can be a year. In fact, in Florida and in Ohio, where I do a lot of our business, it generally takes us between 9 months to 15 months to do a foreclosure. I have a really good attorney, and so they can sometimes fast track it a little bit. But in general, you're going to say anything you buy that has to go to foreclosure in those states in a judicial state takes about a year or more. Some of the Northeast, like New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, I've heard stories of foreclosures taking three years or more. And for that, I don't invest in that particular region. It doesn't mean it's not a good region to invest in. I just don't like tying my money up for that long, and I wouldn't do that to my joint venture partners. There are really good returns if you're willing to take the plunge in New York. Sometimes you can make home runs on every deal. It just takes you 3 years to do it. Non-judicial means you're not actually going through the court to do a foreclosure. It's not completely true because there's a little bit of court involved, but it's not a long drawn-out legal process. It goes a lot faster. In some of the states, for example, where you can invest in essentially, if you had to foreclose, you could take back your property in 2 months, 3 months maximum, sometimes 4 months, like North Carolina, Texas, Tennessee, some of those. And the thing about that is, there's really good reasons for both. I'm not suggesting one is better than the other. For example, in judicial states, such as Florida, it's okay to me that I would buy something that I won't be able to profit on for over a year because the Florida property values are increasing. So if I do take back a property a year from now, I know it's going to be worth more than what it's worth today when I bought it. So those are just some of the things you need to consider. I am a student of both Scott Carson and Eddie Speed, and so I've learned quite a bit. One of the things that they both talk about that a lot of people don't follow, that I recommend you do if you're just getting started, is pick 5 states and no more than 5 states. It's really easy to do the shiny object syndrome and look at everything in every state, and particularly if you are brand new to this and you go on some of the auction sites like FCI and you're trying to buy a note or two, it's so easy to get enamored with, wow, that one looks shiny, and then you see one shinier. Some of you might be familiar with the squirrel looking at nuts type thing. Pick 5 states and learn those states and learn the laws, like the judicial, and so if they're not, what's the redemption period? You need to know this. You need to build a team, and you don't want to diffuse yourself too much until you start getting some successes. And for me, the first 5 states I had on the slide before were the slides that were the states that we initially got involved with. But I actually started out with just 2 states. and that was Ohio and Florida. And both of those are judicial states. And at the time, it was so I could really learn the entire process. I knew that it was going to take me longer to make money, but I was using my own money. And because of that, I really wanted to understand every in and out. Now, I'll tell you, as investors, you probably don't need to do that. There's a lot of really smart people that are in the business that you're going to come across and need to use their services anyway. So let their expertise work for you. That was a lesson I learned a little later than I probably should have. It took me about a year to realize that I couldn't do it all myself and should not do it all myself. The desired exit strategies is important. Now, as I mentioned, there's quite a few exit strategies right now in the business, and it relates to whether you're buying a vacant property note or if you're buying a an owner occupied. So what you're trying to figure out is, what's your end game? What is it you're looking to do? If you're looking to get cash flow, you're going to focus in on certain aspects of notes that are going to lend itself towards that succeeding. If you're just looking to get the property, I can recommend that you can do a lot different things. If you're just trying to get a property so that you can either sell it or rent it, then you don't need to worry about whether it's owner occupied. You don't need to worry about what the interest rate that the borrower's not paying. You don't need to worry about how bad their arrearages are, unless you're going to go chase them for those in a deficiency judgment. And I'm going to show some examples in just a moment of an exit strategy. And then I guess we all kind of want to know what's the end game. The end game is, what are we going to make? What kind of money are we going to make on this? So you need to kind of have an understanding of what it is you're trying to earn, either for yourself or with your joint venture partners, if you're doing that, or if it's on your own. Are you doing it in your IRA, or are you worried about taxes right now? Well, you wouldn't necessarily need to be in an IRA. You can use a Roth IRA and never pay taxes on it again, or you can use a straight self-directed IRA and then defer your taxes later. If you're interested in participating in a fund, and there's plenty of note funds out there, then are you looking for quarterly distributions? Are you looking for deferment? Are you looking to grow your wealth? So what is the end game, and what are the ROIs you're looking for? We personally, in my business, target a note. Well, when we look at notes and we do all of our due diligence, we want to make sure that for the end result, which in this case, the worst case scenario would be you have to foreclose. If I had to foreclose, I need to make sure that I am getting a estimated, because it's always estimated till it's reality, ROI of 30%. We actually go a little lower than that. We accept up to as down as low as 25%. And the reason is, we actually work with joint venture partners. And if somebody's working with me and lending me money or participating in a deal with us, we want to make sure that they're earning a 12.5% minimum return on their money, because we just think that's a good return. It's above average, right? It's better than people are going to get out of the stock market most of the time. And it's fairly consistent, but at the same time, I've had a lot of people say, hey, can you guarantee me 50% on my money? And I love to say no, and I would never do that. I don't actually love to say no, but I do say no. And the reason is because I just, there's so many zigs and zags in the note world. You just don't know. That if I had to foreclose, I can guarantee, I can, with a fairly certain estimate, give you the minimum returns on your investment. But I can't tell you for sure what you're going to make. And I can certainly never promise something that I know I can't really promise. And so be aware of that, especially if you're starting to raise capital. Which brings me to, how do you invest in notes successfully? And I've talked about 6 things. All right. And we'll talk a little bit about each of them, but they're really considerations for you guys to look at. And the first is processes. So if you're going to do a part-time note investing and you're going to work the notes out yourself, you need to, as I mentioned earlier, understand your strategy in general, but then figure out some of the things that are critical. Like, how are you going to find your notes? There are a lot of ways you can buy notes. You can buy them from me. I mean, not that I suggest you do that, but you can buy them from online auction sites like there's a company called FCI, and there's others. You can try and call banks, and you can get some that way. You can call hedge funds. You can work with some note educators who will then connect you with them. And so it's important that you kind of think about it. If you're trying to get 40, 50, 100 notes a year, then you're going to have to come up with a system. If you only want one or two, then I recommend you might pay a little more than you should, but it doesn't hurt to just go out on the auction sites because you can get your feet wet. What are you going to do to make sure you are consistently doing due diligence, for example? I recommend that you do three things. The first is, everybody talks about it, but no one really does it. You need to write down your goals for the business. You have to treat this as a business first, by the way. Even if you're investing with other people, you need to look at what is it that you're trying to accomplish and what is your end game. So you write down your goals. For me, my goals were to retire myself within 5 years from my high-pressure, ridiculous 80-hour-a-week VP of marketing job that I was starting to hate more and more every day I went to it. And I did that. Now, I actually did it in 5.5 years, but I wrote a goal out. And I didn't know how long it was going to take when I wrote those goals. I wrote a bunch of sub goals too. I wanted to earn a certain income a year. I wanted to make sure that I can provide for my family. I wanted to have more time to do vacations because I wasn't taking vacations and I hadn't taken one in like 8 years. Things like that. So when you document your goals, it's a lot easier then to kind of visualize where you're headed. And the next thing you need to document is things like simply how am I going to buy a note? What is the due diligence I'm going to commit myself to? For example, a lot of times it's easy to get into the middle of looking at a deal and trying to convince yourself always to Sunday that this deal is awesome when it really isn't, just because you want to really get it. You want to, man, I like the way that property looks, or something. I feel bad for this borrower. And even if the numbers really don't work, a lot of us will try and talk ourselves into it. If you document your due diligence, I'm going to do this first. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to never accept anything with less than a 12% ROI. I'm never going to buy something that's got a fair market value of under 25,000. Those kind of things that are just critical to you, and I can't tell you what those are. You have to kind of come up with them yourself. If you follow those rules, you're going to be a lot better off. It's really easy to sidetrack. Again, the shiny object syndrome is really pretty easy. How are you going to balance time between your full-time job, if you have them, and notes? Now, if you're planning to invest passively with somebody else, whether it be joint venture or note fund, this probably isn't as important to you. But if you want to go it alone, and you want to build a business or even a hobby, because you can treat it as a business hobby. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to replace your income. You can just use it as a way to grow some wealth. You want to document the amount of time. For example, I committed to myself in 2011 that I was going to spend an extra two hours a day every day, Monday through Friday, after work, well, really after my family went to bed, from 10 o'clock to midnight on my notes business. Now, I'll tell you that not everything can get done from 10 o'clock to midnight. There are some times when you have to do stuff during the middle of the day. So then you got to think about, okay, if you have a full-time job, how are you going to be able to do that? Is it easy to get away to make a phone call? Can you do stuff on your lunch break? Well, with me, I was traveling around the world. I went to Australia, I went to London. I had a big team in London. I was in London a dozen times a year. And I made a decision that in order to make this work, particularly when working with sellers to try and buy some of the assets, I would skip the pub. That is so generally what everybody does in the UK. I wouldn't go out with them all. Not, I mean, I did because they're my team, but I wouldn't spend hours and hours out with them because I knew I had to get this done, and I had a full-time job that I was working at the same time. So those are the things you have to look at from a process perspective. And then the last thing about process that I want to point out is, so who's going to do what for you in your business? I talked about a team, and it really kind of segues to the number two, actually. We'll do that instead of spending a lot of time on it. One of the things about the note business is there are a lot of really smart people out there who can help you succeed and are designed to help you succeed, quite frankly. One of the things I learned later than I should have that I can impart to you is you can't do it all yourself. You shouldn't try and do it all yourself. And one of the ways you might look at taking some of the burden off your own personal shoulders is to look into using virtual assistants, for example. So there's really great virtual assistants out there. They're people out in the Philippines. They're here in the U.S. A lot of places who you can outsource some of the mundane tasks that aren't necessarily imperative to the business, but you need them anyway. For example, some of the research to decide on when you get a collection of assets on a spreadsheet, which is called a tape, by the way. If there's 500 assets on that tape, how do you whittle it down to the 5 you want to consider buying? And quickly, because time is of the essence. When a tape is sent out, potentially dozens or maybe 100 people are getting that. And how do you get your bid in quickly and price it correctly so that you're more likely going to win the purchase? One of the ways is you can send some of that off to virtual assistants. You could, if you're bigger, you have more money to deploy, you can have a full business like I do now, where I have an intern, I have employees, but that's not always right away. So just something to be aware of and think about that. It's really critical that you don't try and do everything yourself. One of my mentors a few years back pointed out something that was like a slap in my forehead, and that was he mentioned you need to look at your self-worth. What is your time worth? If you were to for me, I had a salary, so I could really easily figure out what my hourly salary was. If you're doing tasks that cost less or cost less than the hourly rate, and you can pay somebody less money to do that, that is beneficial to you. So you're adding value to your business, and you're doing higher value activities. I took that to heart. Now, I didn't use a virtual assistant, not because I didn't want to. I just felt it for my business because I was all over the map, literally, in time zones and things. It was not as easy for me as just having an intern I can contact, and ultimately brought a business partner in who's got the weird, quirky time that I do. So it worked out better for us. But you also got to find a lot of services for your business, and that's probably even more critical than virtual assistants. For example, you need to be able to go understand what the property looks like if you're going to bid on an asset. Why? Because if you Google the asset and the picture says 2013, you're 3 years removed from what it really looks like today. So do you want to trust that you're going to bid $75,000 on this note that you might get accepted and then find out that the roof fell in because no one went and looked at it? So you're going to want to build out a team of realtors. And again, if you start with 1 or 2 states, it's pretty simple. Call up some realtors, say, hi, I am considering investing. I might have some properties for sale soon, And if I do, if you can work with me on some things I need, I'd be happy to give you the listing. You'd be surprised how many real estate agents will bend over backwards to get a pocket listing from you. I never pay realtors to do any sort of research for us. Now, that doesn't mean they're not, people who are getting paid aren't doing a good job. I just don't need that because most of them are hungry and they love to help out because they think they're going to get a leg up on their competition. And if they can sell a property or they get access to the property and they don't have to split a commission, they're really excited about that. The other thing you need is property management. Now, if you're going to be a vacant note investor and purchase property out of state, that's a fairly daunting thought for many people. Oh my God, why would I ever invest out where I can't go touch it and feel it? And believe it or not, it's no big deal. It's really simple. As long as you have a good team in place. And what you need to know is if you're going to buy some property, you're going to take back property, for example, or own it out of state, which we do. Like I mentioned, we're in Columbus, Dayton, and Memphis, among others. We hired really good property management who's our eyes on the property, our feet on the ground, and they are the ones that deal with all the stuff that I don't want to deal with. They talk to tenants when we have tenant issues. They get leases signed for us. They collect rents. And oh, by the way, if something breaks, they fix it. And so we don't have to do any of that. And so it really becomes mailbox money. Attorneys are critical to your business. You need an attorney in the states you're going to do business in because inevitably you will foreclose on somebody. It's just a nature of the business. And you want somebody who understands real estate law and has done foreclosures and can support you. And the nice thing is almost every attorney follows the Fannie Mae guidelines for what it costs to do a foreclosure. So because of that, you know pretty much what it's going to cost you up front. Now it's a matter of you want to interview attorneys to find out, do they gel with you? Are they like-minded? Are they going to be cooperative? Are they going to bill you every time they send you an email for 15-minute increments? I actually made a mistake early on where we hired an attorney who started billing us $34, which was 1/4 of her hourly rate because she would send me an email because she doesn't bill less than 15-minute increments. And that was a very short-lived relationship. I learned a lot because of that. And I can just tell you, if you find anything like that, there's so many attorneys out there that you don't need to be ever paying for that sort of thing. The most important thing you will ever hire, and I say thing because it's a company, is a servicer. Now, what a servicer does is services your loans. Sounds simple. Servicing your loan is a kind of an oxymoron when it's non-performing because they're not really servicing much since there's nothing to service because no one's paying you. However, what servicers do, and the real reason you want them, is they are pretty much keeping you at arm's length from any of the laws that affect the buyer-lender relationship. Borrower-lender relationship. So, for example, RESPA, CFPB, which is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the Dodd-Frank laws, they are set up to protect and adhere to those laws. So they're managing loans for you under those guidelines, so you don't ever have to worry about being out of compliance and potentially getting sued or worse from one of these government entities for breaking the law that you didn't know existed. That's why you use a servicer. Now, what they do along the way is they collect money for you. They actually will help you find attorneys or work with attorneys if you need one. They will do borrower outreach, and if they have a full loss mitigation plan, they could even work out loan modifications and forbearance agreements and things for you. So there's some pretty good value for what they do. And some of them are fairly inexpensive, and some of them you get what you pay for. If you're paying more money, they're doing a lot more services. We use a couple different servicers. I don't advertise who they are online because I don't want to endorse anybody per se, but if somebody wants to learn later, they can message me. We also have to hire contractors. And so you need a team of contractors, because if you're going to foreclose, which you will eventually do, you need to think about, what am I going to do with the property now that I get it? So in judicial states, one of the things that happens during the foreclosure process is the sheriff has to sell the property on the courthouse step. What that means is you may never see the property. They may sell it for you to another investor at a bid price that you set. But quite a few times you'll end up getting the property back because nobody wants to pay what you really want it for, because they're looking for their bottom feeders, looking to get a dollar, a 90% discount on $100. So it just depends. But so if you get a property back, then you have to figure out what the condition of the property is. Realtors can help you by going through it for you. Property preservation companies can help you and give you an estimate for what might be required repairs if you're going to make it a rental, or if you want to go sell it. But once you figure that out, you need to actually have somebody do the work. So you need to find a group of qualified licensed contractors, and sometimes the best way to do them is to just ask around to investors like us and Kimberly and others who've done that already. Word of mouth is always the best reference. However, if you're not finding somebody, you're going to have to do some research to figure out who's out in East Bumble, Iowa, and decide if you want to find the right rehabber. Or you can just try and sell it as is. But sometimes as is hard when there's no roof, or the roof is pretty destroyed, or somebody poured cement down the toilet, like I had happen once in my one of my foreclosures. So just be aware of that. And then there's two others, and then we'll move on. The self-directed IRA, I mentioned that, but if you don't have one, I recommend you do get one, even if it takes you a little while to get it. There's quite a few custodians out there. The real reason you want a self-directed IRA is because you can essentially set it and forget it. You can invest in something passively with somebody else. You can't invest in your own deals, by the way, with a self-directed IRA. So you can invest in mine, but I can't invest in mine, if that makes sense. I can invest in yours with my IRA, but I can't do it with myself. So that's the other reason. You can actually start growing your wealth with other people doing the work. And then finally, if you're going to be in the business, you're going to need to network with more notes investors and buyers. And one of the ways you're doing that today is you're on this. And so hopefully, if this is your first time on here, you'll continue joining us. We do a lot of calls to talk about the notes as we're working them. We do education like this, and it's really a great group. One thing I will say about your team, and then I'll move off. It's a good idea to trust them, but be aware that you have to verify. In other words, it can be real easy for people to get a little lazy and potentially even take advantage of you if they did a good job for you a few times and you just start letting them do their own thing. They generally they might be disappointing you later on. So take it from me, I've actually experienced that. It's disappointing, but it's important that you do keep an eye out on everybody that's working for you, because obviously they're working for you. And it's either earning you money or costing you money. So think of it that way. Implementing systems. Now, when I talk about systems, most people immediately go to, oh, I got to go buy software. And I'm not suggesting that at all. You could, and theoretically, it doesn't hurt to have some software, but it's not necessary. Okay. Other than you need a computer, and right now, everybody's got the probably most powerful computer they've ever held in their hand, called the phone. But you're going to want a printer. If you don't have all that, you probably should be a passive investor. I've actually been talking to some folks who are like, hey, I'm an old dog. You can't teach me new tricks. And while that's true, some of the stuff is just going to be more important for you to have. Like you're going to be signing contracts, so you need a printer. You need to be able to scan it back in and email it. And you're going to need to, at some point, if you're going to grow the business, you're going to need to create a database of contacts. Now, a database could be I've got all these email addresses in my Outlook. It could also be a much more formal database. You can put together using something like a MailChimp or even bigger and better, a way to communicate with your constituents. And constituents could be your friends and family. It could be investors. It could be your team that I talked about a minute ago. It could be a lot of things. We personally, for Platinum Ventures, do have a database we utilize for communication and specifically marketing and drip campaigns and things like that. And it's a system called MailChimp. I won't say it's the greatest thing, but it's free. And when you get to a certain point, you probably have to start paying for a very, a more, well, I don't, just paying for a system like that. We also use a CRM, which stands for Customer Relationship Management software. And there's quite a few of those out there. One of them is, most of them sit out in the cloud, if those are familiar with the internet, and you can just rent them. So monthly we pay a bill, and it allows us to do a lot of things on our notes. So now that we've got a couple hundred notes that we're managing, and you have to worry about what you're forgetting about. So for example, taxes are really big in the note world. They can kill you. If you're not paying attention to delinquent taxes, it's one of the few things that will wipe out a first position lien. The taxing agencies, the counties or the state, mostly the counties, they're going to get their money. And if they're not getting their money, they're going to take the property to get their money because they are required to get their money. And it doesn't matter if there's $2,000 of back taxes owed and a $100,000 mortgage that's not being paid. Guess which gets paid first? Those $2,000 of taxes. And they'll wipe out me completely as a $100,000 lien. So you want to have a CRM system that pretty much workflows out all the things related to your notes. We do that for every note we buy. We also, of course, because we do take some joint venture money, we have a lot of information about our investors and their likes and dislikes and where they are, how long they've been in there. It helps us calculate our ROIs and things like that. Which brings me to, I mentioned on a slide or two ahead of time, one of the things you need to look at is what is the ROI you're looking for. Well, in order to kind of model out what the ROI is you're looking for, you need an ROI calculator. And what I mean by an ROI calculator is not you take your desk calculator and you subtract the cost of the note and then say plus what we make and there you go. You probably need to think about how to model out in an Excel spreadsheet. That's probably the fastest and easiest way. All the parameters related to a note. Now that sounds scary to some folks, especially if you don't know Excel. I will say there's a book out there called Excel for Dummies, which is pretty easy to learn to read. And if you don't know how to use Excel, you will by the time you read the book. And what you're trying to do is just take a look at, and I'm licking my finger and I'm saying guesstimating the amount of return on your investment for a specific note or group of notes that you buy. You're looking for a few things. You're looking for the value of the property. You're looking for the percentage you can buy the note against that value and against the unpaid balance. And then you have to kind of look at, well, what are some of the costs that I know I'm going to incur once I pick the note up? Well, you're going to have to think about always looking at it as, I'm going to have to foreclose. Now, you hope you don't, but you want to model it as if you're foreclosing. Because if you do that, that's the worst case scenario. That's the one that takes the longest, it costs the most. And if you can make the numbers work in a foreclosure situation, then your ROI will only be better and your return on your money for any of the other exits that are employed. So systems like an ROI calculator are a no-brainer. But the other thing you have to think about is just email itself. A lot of you are probably not as familiar with email, the more intricate, the more advanced functions of emailing. But if you're going to try and raise capital, for example, you want to send out emails on a regular basis talking about your business and your deals. And you don't want to go, hi, you haven't met me yet, but please give me $100,000, right? And I'm being a little glib and facetious with that, but I've gotten emails like that. So you don't want to do that. And so you have to really think about how you drip campaign, that's a marketing term, to the people you're trying to communicate with. Another example is if you're trying to get assets from banks or asset managers like at hedge funds. They're never just going to send them to you first time. You're going to have to communicate with them. You have to build the trust, and a way to do that is via email, social media, Facebook, Twitter. We personally use Facebook and LinkedIn. We don't use Twitter. And the last thing is you need some accounting and legal systems. Now, when I say systems, I don't necessarily mean software. You need an accountant. Okay, you need to have a way to give the information to your accountant. It could be very simple. It could be email. You could buy a Dropbox type capability where you're uploading and downloading between the two of them in a secure environment, like a private cloud. And the same thing with your attorneys. So you need all of that under systems. You know, I've been talking for a while. Is there any questions, Kimberly?
There sure are. Let's see. Christina was wondering, you mentioned about getting a lawyer in every market. And she was wondering, do you actually need to retain them as soon as you're interested in that market? When do you need to actually hook up with them?
Really good question, Christina. And hi, by the way. Well, you know, it depends. I traditionally try not to retain them. But some of them, you know, you kind of want to give them. I retain them if I'm willing to try them out, so to speak. And I'll vet them first. Like if I have never spoken to them and hi, I need your help, I'm not going to retain them right away. I want to have them kind of tell me, you know, as much as I'm interviewing them, I want them to interview me. Why would you want to work with me as an investor? Why do I want to work with you? I know there's other attorneys out there. Give me some examples of how you've succeeded with cases like mine. And then if it sounds good, then I might retain them right away. But I usually have a need really soon before I'll do that. I don't go hire somebody and then it may take me a year to need them, right? It's just something I don't do. But when I'm ready for it, I might wait an extra week just to interview folks. Like when we needed an attorney in Georgia, I interviewed 6 different attorneys before I felt that we gelled with the one we hired. Because it's like I said, it's just as much about they have to be competent legally, but if they're jerks and they can't, and I don't want to work with them because they're just so arrogant. For me personally, I would like somebody that I feel good about, who's helping me, and we can have that good relationship.
Okay. And her follow-up question is, what about using a fee attorney that is connected to a title company?
Well, I can't really speak to that because I don't do that. I do know some note investors that do, though, so I really can't give advice one way or the other because we try to just, rather than, because for one thing, I don't generally involve title companies unless we're selling a property, so not under the note scenario. So most of the time when I'm looking for a foreclosure expert, and title companies are really more focused on the attorneys, that is, they're focused on the ins and outs and dotting the I's and crossing the T's around contractual law as it relates to real estate. And I'm being very general there. I'm sure there's good ones out there, but it's just not really what we've looked at.
And as what you were alluding to, you want to hire the expert. You want to hire the guy that knows what you need him to do for you. You don't want to hope he kind of has knowledge in that area too.
That's a really good point. You know, a case in point is we utilize something I forgot to mention in our team, something called a document custodian. And there's been some early on areas where I was working with a document custodian where I was essentially telling them what I needed them to do, and they're the experts, and instead of, they should be telling me what they're going to do for me, but I had to tell them, hey guys, you forgot to do this, or and you know, if I don't know it, we could have had a huge problem. It just so happens I've been doing it a while. And it wasn't that their company is bad or anything. They had hired a new person who was getting on board, getting up to speed. But I didn't want to have to pay to teach that person. And so in my mind, it's like you don't, when you hire somebody, you don't learn on my dime. I mean, I'm not suggesting that I'm as arrogant that I know everything and they don't, because I don't. But at the same point, your company is being paid to be my expert, so be it. That's the way
Makes
I look
sense.
at it.
Because they're certainly not giving you a discount while you're teaching them.
Exactly. That's absolutely for sure. And
Okay.
you write enough checks, you're like, okay, wait a minute, this is getting a little silly.
All right, a related question. How do you connect with note-friendly lawyers in your key states?
Well, I got to tell you, I don't feel that there's a lot of note-friendly lawyers in any state, let alone key states. There's a couple. One of the ways I've connected with them is because I'm part of this notes mastermind that has attracted a collection of pretty good attorneys. One of the ways I did it was trial and error. I mean, when you call up somebody and you go, "Hey, I'm a note investor," and they're like, "You're a what?" You probably have, they're probably not the right lawyer for you. For example, just as kind of a little mini case study, we recently were trying to, we foreclosed on somebody in Alabama, Birmingham, and we wanted to sell the property under a contract for deed, sometimes called a land contract. And we reached out to in this case, Christina, a title-based attorney, and said, "Hey, we got a buyer. We want to do a contract for deed, and we are going to create a note, and blah blah blah." And they were like, "You're what?" And so I immediately knew that wasn't going to be the attorney I needed to use. On the other hand, there are some out there that are very, very big experts in notes. Well, Kimberly actually and some of the other folks on the call actually attended something called Note Expo in Fort Worth back in November, and there was an attorney. Actually, there's accountants too. There was an attorney who was essentially taking Eddie Speed's mentoring program so that he can learn what it is we do, so that he can be better at servicing us as customers. Not that I'm not suggesting he necessarily wants or doesn't want to do notes, but he wanted to know what we do so he could better serve us. I think that's very cool. And we also met an accountant that's doing the same thing. There's a lot of them out there who will spend the time and effort because they're very specialized. The other way I've met them, although it's a little expensive in the way I did it, is I've gone to some note conventions, particularly I went to something called the IMN Residential Mortgage, Non-Performing and Performing Mortgage Summit out in Santa Monica this past fall, where I met an attorney. And it turns out he's an attorney for one of the hedge funds that I'm buying notes from. So it was just fortuitous. We started talking a little bit, and it turns out he works with companies like me. And, he works with big companies like the hedge funds. But he's like, look, I mean, I have expertise in notes. I know how to foreclose on them. I know how to write them. I know how to do deed and lose. I know everything you need to know. And I'm pretty cheap, which for attorneys is still expensive, by the way. But and so we hired him, and he's been doing a great job. His company, I should say, his firm. So that's kind of the other way you can meet. One of the third ways is you can do messages out on like Bigger Pockets, which is a social media platform for real estate, and just, hey guys, I'm looking for a real estate attorney in Atlanta who knows notes. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to share their contacts with you. I suggest in that instance, because you're getting a referral from maybe somebody you don't know, that you do the due diligence and vet the person. But I've found a lot of people that way. And that's also how I found a lot of realtors too, through Bigger Pockets and things like that.
Okay, last question. You mentioned searching for properties, owner-occupied properties owned by vets and the elderly. How does one search for that?
Well, you don't easily. I will admit that. However, you can. I like to say that they leave some breadcrumbs. If you're familiar with the Hansel and Gretel story, so there are certain telltales For example, when we buy, and I have to give a shout out quick to my sick business partner. When we buy and make bids on notes, my my business partner Natalie is a due diligence master, and so what we do is we'll actually, during the process of trying to decide if we're going to bid on a note, we'll go out and look at their property taxes. Even though it's not necessary, we do it anyway. And when you're looking out on the property taxes, you can pretty much figure out if they're an elderly or not, because they have elderly exemptions. And you can pretty much figure out if they're a veteran or not, because they have veteran exemptions. Not always, but most of the time, the counties is transparent enough that if it's online, you can learn it. So that's one of the ways. That's actually the biggest way that we do it. There's also other ways, because you can kind of, if you see, not that this is always the case, but if you're getting a picture of the house and you're looking at it and there's an American flag and a POW flag, or the POW missing in action flag, they're a veteran. Things like that. And we do that, and it's a little extra work, but I think it benefits us doing it. Now, there's a lot of things you don't know until you're in the conversation. But if we're looking at a mortgage that they've had the mortgage since like 1992, and they're close to 30 years and they start defaulting, that's another pretty good indication that there's an elderly in the house, and that somebody might have passed away. Like I said, it's all kind of deductive reasoning. It's not necessarily a fact, but we use those things to kind of help us along. And I will tell you, anything that was originated in the 90s that they just start defaulting in the last couple of years, it's almost always elderly passed on. And it's sad, but the surviving spouse has a struggle with, paying for a funeral, potentially getting, or maybe they're sick and there's a lot, and now they're ready to move on, but they're about to lose their home. And those are the best to help, because it feels really good for me and to help them, but they don't want to lose their home, so they're very willing to work with you. And if you can make the payment system work for them, they're your best friends, and they're the best advocates as well. We get testimonials. In fact, we have one on our Facebook of an example of a borrower who's kind of raving about us. And it's really nice. I know I kind of got off sidetrack there, but that's really what we do to find those.
Okay. And worst case scenario, if you're wrong, you still have an owner-occupied property.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you said, if they don't, if they don't want to work with us, it doesn't matter who's in the house. But we do find that our elderly and our veterans reperform more, and they are also very they're very appreciative. And we've had some calls and say, "Can you help my friend?" And I'm like, "Well, I can't get their mortgage because I don't know how to do that." But we kind of might know how to do that. But they're like, "Well, this is their house and everything." It's not as simple as they think, right? Because we help them. So it's really very, very kind of humbling to meet some of these folks too, which is my why, or one of my whys. All right, I know I've been blabbing for an hour already. I've only got a couple more slides. So just one last thing on this. Marketing, we talked about. Just do some marketing. Raising capital goes hand in hand. If you have your own capital, congratulations. Just grow it if you can. And the last thing is commitment. I'm not suggesting you're not committed, but if you think about it, you really need to. You don't put off for tomorrow what you can do today. The one thing I'll tell you about the notes business is you snooze, you lose. A lot of folks will get a tape, and then they'll start analyzing it, and then they'll think about it, and then they'll second guess themselves, and then it's like a week before they submit their bids, and all the stuff's been gone, and only the crap's left. And you don't want the crap. And that happens to a lot of people. Time is of the essence, and you have to make the time. If you get a tape and you're going to do this business, a tape in the morning, you have to get bids out no later, in this is my personal opinion, than 24 hours, but 48 hours minimum. I mean, at the latest, because while you're already at a disadvantage because you're at work during most of the day, and so people like me who are doing this full time can be submitting them in hours potentially. When you wait beyond 48 hours, all the good stuff's gone. So just be aware of that. So we're going to talk about 4 different exit strategies, and I'll go quickly through them. But these are some deals we just completed in the last 4 months. So I think I like to highlight the 4 top exit strategies that we do, and then there's a couple sub variants that I'll talk about inside the case studies. But foreclosure and rent, foreclosure and sell, evicting somebody out of the property, selling it as a contract for deed, which, as I mentioned, sometimes called a land contract, and then the nirvana is the reperforming loan. So my first example is in Tennessee. We do a lot of investing in Memphis. In fact, we're trying to figure out a way to work with the local blight control. There's actually a blight elimination committee that our property manager is a part of in Memphis, and we're looking at how we might be able to get an audience in front of them, because a lot of the properties we're buying or the notes we're buying are in blighted areas. That's kind of a weird thing about Memphis. You may have a disaster house right next to a multi-million-dollar home, so it's weird that way. So this particular note we purchased back in July. We bought it from a hedge fund. The hedge fund was pretty much doing it as a fire sale, I think. And the reason was they had 5 days to sell it before it went to foreclosure. And in Tennessee, it is a non-judicial state. So what happens when you foreclose is you get the deed. And they didn't want the deed, so they were selling it. So we bought it from them. The person in the house she's challenged, to be honest. She's lower income, been in the house though since the 90s, wasn't elderly, and owed well over $63,000. The house is worth half that. It is in the infamous Northridge. If anyone knows Memphis, they know what Northridge is. It's an area that's just full of gangs and stuff. It's really pretty community. You wouldn't know it when you look at the houses, but it's the woman told us there was a murder down the road from her. So not the kind of place we really like to invest in. However, it was a good deal, and we realized we can help this lady. She called us the day we bought it. I want to save my house. Please don't foreclose on me. I've been trying to figure out how to make this work. I just don't have any job right now. I've lost 3 jobs in the last 4 years. And we're like, well, unfortunately, it's kind of too late to stop the foreclosure, but we can work with you on what to do after the foreclosure. And for her, she just didn't want to lose the house. So we immediately started discussing, look, we can rent it to you, or I can sell it back to you. But the ship's sailed, so to speak, on the foreclosure. I mean, we actually got service transfer on the loan on Friday, and the foreclosure was Monday. So that's how fast it went. But she did want to stay. She worked with us. It's kind of a gamble because there's always the fact that people are, when they're desperate, will tell you anything. But we brought our property manager in, met her, vetted her, inspected the house. It's a good house inside, well maintained. As much pride of ownership as she can have in the area she's at. So she did sign a lease. She started paying us in September, and she's renting it for $600 a month, which is exactly what she would have paid a month in her mortgage. The difference is she has a job now, and a nice job working at one of the auto plant brake factories or something. So what's cool about that is we're already collecting rents, and after 1 full year of rent collection, we're going to get a cash-on-cash return of our 13 grand at 54.4%. Now, this was, that's assuming she keeps paying, and quite frankly, there is that risk that she can stop. But if she does not, then our goal would be to sell this as a turnkey rental property to an investor, do half down, create a note, so we get an annuity. And if she does fail, then we'll just probably ask her to move, and we will put a new person in place and do the same thing. The one interesting thing about this is her rents from us are $600 a month. She went and looked at trying to move out to a single, like a one-bedroom apartments and things like that. They're going for more money. So I think she said the lowest was like 700,000. This is $700 a month. This is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and so she's getting a full house for $600 a month. She couldn't even get the $700 apartment because there's a waiting list, and obviously her credit's shot, so that was a big problem. So we helped her, and we're making money, and that's one of the ways we do it. Another way we do it is, unfortunately, foreclosing and selling the property. In other words, getting the people out completely. This one is a condominium that we purchased. Actually, I believe my joint venture partner on this is on the phone. We bought it in March of 2015. Now, I'll tell you, this was an absolute really long process, longer than I would have liked. Alamani Springs is a suburb outside of Orlando. So we bought a first position lien. We paid $25,000 for it from a broker. The person owed almost 60 grand, actually 70 something when you add the arrearages in. They filed Chapter 7, and they had moved out by the time we bought it. So in our mind, it was going to be a slam dunk, real easy foreclosure because the guy didn't want it. He got absolved of the debt. All we had to do was foreclose to get the title clean. However, what ended up happening, and this is one of the reasons why you need a team of supporting cast of characters, is the documents weren't all clean. And what do I mean by that? I mentioned there's something called assignments and allonges, and so when we bought this loan, the assignment chain was intact. However, one of the assignments was from an entity that was non-existent. And what I mean by that is it was like written as City Mortgage LLC when it really was Citibank Mortgage LLC. So the wording of the assignment legally was incorrect. And a bad example because City Mortgage still exists, but the entity went away. They don't exist anymore. It's like some mortgage company that went out of business like 10 years ago or something like that. And so what happens in that situation is you have to get something called a corrective assignment. There's only 2 companies that can do that for you, and one of them is the controller of MERS, which I forget what it stands for, Mortgage Execution and Registration System, something like that. And that's Ocwen. Ocwen used to be GMAC Mortgage. They're headquartered in Florida. They're horrible to work with. And so our document custodian spent 3 months trying to get this one piece of paper from them that had to be notarized. So that delayed us 3 months. Then there were a lot of liens. We had to serve each of the lien holders. The actual foreclosure process itself was only 12 months, which, as I said, in Florida isn't so bad. And then we got because this is a judicial state, we successfully foreclosed, and it went to the sheriff's sale. So, if you will, tried to sell it on the courthouse steps. We set a price that we wanted to sell it at, and it did not sell. So that meant the condominium then turned back over to us. And at that time, we turned it over to a realtor. However, there's an HOA involved because it's a condo. And in Florida, HOAs are problematic. The person who stopped paying their mortgage all these years ago also didn't pay the HOA all those years ago. And the HOA was owed over $47,000 in back homeowners association fees. Those don't get wiped out under foreclosure. But what there is in Florida is a statute that's called the safe harbor. And so safe harbor means that it realizes that these HOAs kind of have lenders over a barrel and potentially buyers, because you can't buy it with an HOA lien. So they have passed a statute that allows us to with a court approval, so you have to get it in writing from the court, to pay either 1 year's worth of HOA assessment or 1% of the original purchase price of the condo in this case, whichever is less. So they call that safe harbor. My problem was we were arguing with an HOA who refused to accept our payment because they were like, we don't care. We don't believe you're entitled to a safe harbor. And it took us 3 more months to get a judge to force them to accept our payment because the judge says, here's where I said they have safe harbor. So it was a lot of fun. And I'm telling the whole story just to say we just sold it a couple weeks ago, right the week before Thanksgiving for $52,500. And it took us 18 months, which is a long time, really. But even with all the things I just described that could have gone wrong and did go wrong, we still made close to 12 grand in profit, which for the life of the investment was 28.3%. So annualized, it came to 18%. So pretty good. There's the evict and sell as a contract for deed. Now, this is a situation that when you have lower value assets, sometimes it's harder to sell them via realtors, for example. I'll tell you a story about this in a second, but so contract for deeds are a way to sell to folks who may not have the credit to get normal conventional lending or funding, I should say, from lenders. Their credit stinks essentially, and it's for whatever reason. It's not that they're necessarily deadbeats. It's just they have blemishes on their credit. They can't get the funding. We can provide them a owner financing way to get into a home. It's what it is. There's a nuance with contract for deeds is that we hold the deed to the property. So if they default, we don't have to foreclose on them, and we can evict them instead. Now, this particular asset is one that we really didn't own. One of our joint venture partners had purchased it on his own, and then realized he really didn't have the time or ability to manage it. So because he was joint venture with us on some other things, he asked us to handle it for him. And we went on a road show. And if those of you who have an opportunity to visit my Facebook page, there's a pretty good detail of the road show that Natalie and I did back in the fall. And we stopped at this house. And you can watch a video. I'm not going to tell you much more about it, but it's kind of humorous. So this house looks pretty nice, right? You look at the outside, you go, wow, quaint little pretty house. Anyway, inside it was fairly disastrous. What you can't see from this picture is the back other side of the roof. There's an actual physical 7 or 8 foot long hole in the roof because a tree fell on the house and in a hurricane a couple years ago, and it stayed there for a year before somebody removed it. So then there was water damage in the house, and the people just essentially, instead of doing anything to fix the problem, they just left. And so he picked it up in, I believe it was either January or February of this year. He finally realized he wasn't ever going to do anything with it, so he asked us to help him in September. And what we did was we hired somebody to change the locks, clean it out, and we stuck a sign in the front door. In the front yard, and it just said, "Will owner finance?" And we threw a payment up. We said $350 a month, $2,500 down, and that's all we said with our phone number. By the time we got on the road, we had already had like 5 phone calls. Ultimately, we got 72 different phone calls from families trying to buy this house, and we had to be completely honest. It was a disaster house, right? So for those of you who know what the after repaired value or ARV on this property should have been somewhere between $55,000 and $60,000, but because of the roof, because there was no AC condenser, we were looking at possibly doing a $25,000 rehab to make it worthwhile. And we didn't want to do that. So we said to everybody who called, "Are you a handyman? Because if you're not a handyman, you can't buy this house, because this house is a handyman special, and we've priced it so that you are getting the best deal possible, but you got to be able to fix it all up." And we ended up selling it at 20. I got a typo in here. I'm sorry. No, I don't. 27,500. We sold the house for 27.5. It's going to be worth 55 when they fix it. This particular family, it was like they were a match made in heaven for this house, because the woman calls me up and I'm immediately thinking, oh God, she's never going to be able to do this. And I said to her, ma'am, just this is a pretty rough house. It's got a hole in the roof. So, there's going to be a lot of ceiling repairs because there's some water damage. This is a house, so you need a handyman. You need somebody, you need to know a roofer. She goes, my husband's a roofer. And my cousin fixes drywall. And my niece does flooring. And so we, every time I say, well, I'm trying to talk her out of it, she's like, you know what? I think this is going to work for us. And before the end of it all, she called me one day and said, hey, it's raining out. Do you mind if my husband and I go and put a blue tarp over the roof to cover that hole so we don't get any more water in it, because we're buying this thing? And so that was the kind of family you want when you sell CFD. So we're gonna, we're gonna get 20% on it for our investor, even after the lemonade, as I like to say. Oh, and sorry. And so what do you do with these things once you build a contract for deed? And the same thing with the rental that I talked about a minute ago. The nice thing is you can sell them later on to other investors as performing. In this case, because this isn't a reperforming, this is a brand new loan that we put with the servicer. They're being, the servicer's recording every month that these people are paying on time. So it's helping their credit. And we're getting a history that we can go out to the market and say, I've got a performing loan for sale. Anybody interested in an annuity at $385 a month? And we could sell it. And we usually would sell those 85 cents of the unpaid balance. And then the final is a reperforming loan. And this just happened. Again, we actually met these folks out on our roadshow. It's in Huntsville, Alabama. Those of you familiar, that's where one of the NASA space centers are, where they track all the satellites and launches of the now defunct space shuttle program. So it's a huge, huge space center that's kind of shuttered down, and a lot of people lost their jobs. This gentleman used to work there, and his wife passed away early this year, so he just wasn't able to pay for a while. He filed bankruptcy. He was in getting guidance to do something called the Bankruptcy 13. Chapter 13 is a court-appointed and managed payment plan, and the mortgage was not part of that. So the court was paying all of his bills except us, because it wasn't part of the plan. Coupled with, when we bought it, we were using a different servicer who elected to get out of the business, and so when they changed over and I had to find a new servicer to work with, it kind of fell into the cracks for 60 days. So we finally got the borrower to talk with us, because we knocked on his front door, which I don't necessarily recommend. It just we didn't expect them to be there, and 3 weeks later, we had a forbearance with him for $550 a month. And the nice thing is, he's thanking us. He was like, thank God, I was so stressed out over the fact that I'm not paying. And, it's a struggle sometimes to pay, but I didn't understand why they didn't put the house in the BK13. I want to keep my house. This is where, my wife passed on here. We grew our kids here. I've been living here for years. He is he's not retired, but he's retirement age, and he's just working odd jobs right now. And the first thing he did was he sent us a good faith payment to say, I want to prove to you that I want to stay in my house. He borrowed the money from relatives, and he says, it was important to me. Do you see that I'm committed to this? And he calls us every month and says, hey, I made my payment. Just want to let you know. And that's really cool. So because this house, you can see pride of ownership, right? I mean, a pretty house. Inside was even nicer, believe it or not. He invited us in to have coffee, which was kind of weird, but we enjoyed it. And this is the borrower who's going to qualify for hardest hit funds. So our servicer has already put him in touch with the Alabama agency that's managing hardest hit funds. We're going to try and give him advice for how to fill that out so that he gets it. Legally, we can't do it for him. If we could, we would. And the idea is get him back to square one and then refinance us out. Obviously, he's got a payment plan that should help his credit out. And if he can't refinance us out, then we'll just sell it as a reperforming. So there's a lot of exits available in a reperforming loan. And what's nice is you can see we're going to make $9,100 this first year, which is a 23% cash-on-cash return. So lastly, how do you get involved in notes? Well, I mentioned them all through the discussion, but you can joint venture with people like myself, Kimberly, and others. There's a lot of folks out there. I just suggest that you talk to some references. There's a couple that do them more than others. There's also just preferred rate loans. You could just loan people money and get a quarterly return for your investment. And there's lots of ways to do that. I would encourage a personal guarantee if you do that from the investor or the note investor. You can get into a notes fund. There's lots of them out there. PPR is one that I'm familiar with. I know there's others. I think Eddie Speed has one as well. I don't invest in those, but that's because I do it myself. And that's the final one you can purchase directly. So hopefully this presentation has given you some ideas around that. The last thing I would like to say is, this is a chess game to me. I think if you treat it as a chess game, meaning strategy, you have to kind of think ahead. What's the next step? You have to realize that you're working against a borrower who you need to be working with, but sometimes they work against you, and you have to think about how do you strategically get them on your side to win the game. Networking is important. As I mentioned, calculate your ROIs, assuming you have to foreclose, and it's gravy from there. And then if you're buying notes, fund them. Don't commit to something and then back out over and over, because you will lose all respect from your sellers and they won't talk to you, and then you won't be getting any assets. And then, things like this meetup are the last thing I would suggest. Come back. We do meet face-to-face every couple months, and then we do this as well. So that's it. I appreciate everybody's time. I know I went over. I always do. I talk too much, but hopefully you found it valuable. And if Kimberly, are there any other questions we can handle?
Okay. And I don't think you talk too much.
Thanks.
No, we pretty much covered it. One question, if you want to cover quickly, do you use your servicers to talk to your borrowers? Do you do it directly? Do you hire someone else to do it?
Well, I will say that we do a little of everything. So first of all, we don't try to talk to borrowers directly. Now, when I say I don't try to, we end up talking to them. But there's two ways. We hired a third-party loss mitigation firm that is actually they're kind of a charitable consumer advocate company. So they're not necessarily as bound to all of the CFPB, Dodd-Frank, and rest of the laws that the servicers are. Servicers don't like that because they want to be in complete control. But especially for some of these lower value contract for deeds, we utilize that firm to do first communication and borrower outreach. And when they get them on the phone, they then connect us to them. And so they go, "Hi, I'm here. Believe it or not, your lender hired us to help you stay in your house. They don't want to take your home from you. And they know you will never talk to them up front. So that's why I'm here, because I'm here to help you. I'm not here to help them, but I want you to be able to stay in your house. How can we help you? We can work with the lender to try and come up with a way to keep you in the house." And that works pretty darn good. And then when he's got their trust, or his company has gotten their trust, then he says, "Well, the lender can actually, these guys aren't like big bag banks. They are a couple people just like you guys. They just have an investment company. And by the way, they want you to keep your house too. So how about I get you on the phone with them, and we all kind of talk and see how we can make it work." So we'll do that. it's a bigger loan, more delinquent, lots of tax liens, then I'll skip that process and I'll let the servicer handle it, because there's going to be a lot of Dodd-Frank and RESPA stuff. Then I don't want to be in the middle of it, and that's a change. I've changed that over the last 6 months for the business. It's working because they are, they're a little more conservative, and so it's a little getting used to this, but they're getting the same result. They're getting borrowers to agree to work with us. But they're the middleman. I'm never talking to them when I do that. So I have to answer the servicer. They go back out because they have their mini Miranda that they have to repeat every time they talk to them and stuff like that.
Great. No more questions, but you've got lots of thank yous, and you did a great job, and always enjoying listening to you.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, I thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And, if you have any questions come up later, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to explain as much as possible.
Great. Thank you for doing this for us, Wayne.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Have a good night, everybody.